Welcome back to another episode of the Return of the Roar Sacramento Kings podcast on Sactown Sports 1140. My name is Brenden Nunes. Got my guys here as we always do. We'll start at the bottom. Chris Watkins, what's going on? Bottom YouTube wise, just to be clear, the video format wise. Anybody watching on YouTube, what's up, Chris? How you feeling, man? Crumble hoodie.
I was doing well about 10 seconds ago, and then you just sent me down to the bottom of the totem pole, which actually I guess is technically, most people don't know, is actually the most important part of the totem pole because it's holding everybody up, but I digress. Doing well. Definitely better than the last time we recorded, where I think there was a lot of frustration, confusion, a lot of emotion in general, and I think today, I think we still feel those things, but I think we just have a little bit more clarity, and I think that there's a lot of just kind of resigning to this is just kind of how it is moving forward now. So, as I guess that's all a descriptor to say. Doing well.
Fair enough. And now I guess the top of the totem pole, the less.
Yeah.
No,
agreed.
I mean, I don't know. Frankie's pretty important. I don't know.
What
I dug myself a hole here early. I dug a hole early. I'm wearing a Yankee hat
totem pole
to make you feel better, man.
That's a good start. No, I almost pointed it out before we started, but it's a good start. But what the hell is a totem pole anyway?
Have you never seen a totem pole?
Yeah, it's like
is it like the
native thing?
Yeah.
Is it okay? For a second, I don't know why I thought about like the swirly barber shop poles. I don't know why that's the first thing that came to mind.
That's definitely not a totem pole.
Nope.
No.
Don't know why you thought of that
great.
either, to be honest.
No.
They are monumental carvings found in Western Canada and Northwestern United States. They are a type of Northwestern coast art consisting of poles, posts, or pillars carved with symbols or figures.
Why is that used as a measuring stick?
A couple totem poles here.
Because they're like stacked. It's like you like stack the art pieces on top of each other, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know why it's used as a measuring stick.
Okay,
I guess it's just. I guess it's an analogy that just people can picture easily.
Wow, pole talk AO on the pod to start. But
as we typically start.
Happy Thursday. I guess it is a happy Thursday. I guess compared to where we were last time we talked, the sky was falling. Maybe it still is, and maybe the past couple of days have been a nice little just vacation from reality. But I think last night, that 76ers game was a really kind of just return to fun basketball for the Kings. At least for the final 3 minutes were fun. I mean, again, another game that was pretty, I think we can say it wasn't really a great game. The past two haven't been like beautiful wins for Sacramento, but the final 4 minutes really were like kind of reverting back to the version of basketball the Kings like that we know that they can play, which is a lot of De'Aaron Fox, and the strides on the defensive end are kind of a new glimpse of maybe what Doug Christie's team has to offer. But I think compared to where they were last time we talked, winning 2 games, especially taking care of it at home, is a great start to kind of trying to crawl out of that hole they put themselves in. But a long way to go. But hey, man, they'll take the wins however they can get them.
We are 6 days removed from Mike Brown's firing and Doug Christie being promoted as interim head coach. 3 games in. One of them was the day after Mike Brown got fired. So Doug Christie didn't exactly have much time to acclimate for this one, but a 122-132 loss to the Lakers. And then you face the Dallas Mavericks without 4 of their starters, at least. No Luka Doncic, no Kyrie Irving, no Najee Marshall, no Derek Lively. I think there's somebody else I'm forgetting, but that's the main aspect of who they were missing there. And you see Spencer Dinwiddie and PJ Washington kind of go crazy on the Kings in the first half and look like, hey, we are the creators, give us some opportunity. The typical next man up. Other people are going to view it as an opportunity game. But the Kings end up taking care of business in the second half, get a 10-point win, ends up being fairly comfortable at the end. And then, like Frankie mentioned yesterday against Philly, it was, I think, concerning for a stretch. Paul George was going crazy. No Keegan Murray. So Keon Ellis is the one that gets the start and is assigned to Paul George. I thought he played great. He had 4 steals, 2 blocks, 3 made threes. DeMar DeRozan gets the defensive player of the game crown, though, because he gets 2 steals late in the clutch that I thought were solid, but we'll get into my thoughts on DeMar, and I would say Kevin Huerter falls into the same thing throughout these last few games. But I want to start with Doug starting Keon Ellis in that game, because this felt like the first real Doug decision, almost in a way, at least public, loud decision, because Mike Brown, somewhat notorious for, look at the Denver game. Keegan Murray doesn't play, and he starts Doug McDermott, and DeMar DeRozan is then the one assigned to Aaron Gordon. So not to be super speculative, but does it feel different that Keon Ellis started this game? Do you think that would have happened if Mike Brown was here, or do you look at that as a Doug Christie decision? I guess we can start with you, Frank.
I think we kind of were joking about it walking to the parking lot last night that I think near 100% certainty, I think we can, because we agreed that Doug McDermott probably, or maybe Jay Crowder, but probably not because he's been kind of in the background lately. Probably Doug McDermott starts that game yesterday. It just seems like for whatever reason, Mike really wasn't wanting to go to Keon as a starter, really in, kind of his later days as a coach. But it really just kind of does show that Keon continues to show what he can bring, what the Kings lack is players of that kind of nature that can be a true 3-and-D option. And we saw last night, just clear as day. I think Keon had 4 steals last night, and he knocks down a clutch 3, a timely 3 to cut it from a 5-point game to a 2-point game, or from a 7-point game to a 4. I can't remember. But the point was, I think it was from a 7-point game.
I think it was
5-point game to a 2-point game. It was 7-4? 7-4.
I think so.
Kept the game within reach. So that's what the Kings have been lacking.
Really.
Yeah. They've been lacking really. And it kind of makes you wonder if we could see a lot more Keon. I think that the main question when Doug slid into that role, primarily because of Doug's history as a player and what he brought when he was on the Kings, when he was, all defensive second team. I think he was all defensive first team one time. Will that mean that Doug will kind of gravitate towards the best defensive option on his roster? Last night, he played, I think, a season high 37 minutes, which is crazy and deserved. And we've been pretty critical of Keon at times about his mishaps on offense and whatnot. But I think last night, and we kind of talked about it, with Mike having a short leash on Keon, maybe last night, Doug just kind of lengthened the leash out a little bit, and maybe that means we're going to see more of him. But I know the fans are calling for it, and it worked out. And that's not a knock against Doug McDermott, who did see the court last night and, got some playing time. But I feel like when you're talking about starting, off on the right foot in these games, and you're down a guy like Keegan Murray who provides versatility and can defend multiple positions, I feel like the easy answer was Keon. And Doug, I think he pressed the right button last night and put Keon in there.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting decision for sure. I think not to do the talking point thing, but I kind of feel like the main takeaway isn't even the starting spot of it. It's more so the 38 minutes. I feel like that's really the part where I think Doug put his stamp on this is we've, obviously, yeah, like you guys said, Keon hasn't entered that starting lineup, or Mike's been hesitant to put Keon into that starting lineup. But I feel like Doug definitely not only took that opportunity, but then play him 37 minutes down the stretch to put him on Paul George down the end of that game. You see him force that offensive foul. It was, that's, I think, what a lot of people have envisioned Keon doing for a long time. And I think it's a big reason why people have been clamoring for him to get those minutes. That definitely kind of felt like a moment in which Doug was kind of taking the reins a little bit and saying, I'm gonna, if we are gonna lose, I'm gonna lose my way. And Brenden, you've actually asked him, and I don't know, if you've cut it or not, but I know you've actually kind of these past couple of days been poking Keon and Doug about how similar their two games are in terms of how Doug used to play and then how Keon kind of is molding his game so far. I can definitely see Keon being the biggest beneficiary of Doug taking over. And who knows, maybe we even see a different level of Keon once Doug can kind of really get his hands on him and start to mold him.
Yeah, interesting for sure. They did have a little bit of a fun back and forth. I guess I was asking Keon at shoot around about Christie and his thoughts on the change, and eventually asked him if he'd seen Doug play as a player, and he admitted that he had not, but kind of joked around that he's got to go watch some highlights because there's no way he was guarding better than me. And comments were quick to say,
that's crazy.
Doug's 3-time all defensive out here. And,
had to guard Kobe Bryant in his prime in the playoffs.
Hey,
And also
is
Doug guarded
Kobe or SGA. Who's harder to guard, man? You know,
I don't know. Doug had to
not a
guard
real question.
Don't do
he had
that.
to guard rookie LeBron in his first game, which of course rookie LeBron is not better than any of those players, but just Doug had to guard, I think probably Jordan at times too.
Probably.
Like that guy's been through a lot.
For sure. And yeah, I've got the chance to ask Doug about it in pregame, and Doug joked that, you know, well, it's fair enough. Like, all my stuff's on VHS. And, you know, he said, I love Keon. I'm going to disagree with Keon, but I love Keon. And I want to just say that Doug uses the word love a lot. Like,
Yeah.
I love Keon. I love Domas. I love this city. I love whoever. Doug is a very loving person. Funnily enough, Domas kind of uses the same wording. You know, you would hear him in whatever struggles. Like, we all still love each other in the locker room. And I'm curious how much you feel like the messaging that we've gotten from Doug publicly, and, you know, it's only been maybe 5 interactions, but you guys also actually worked with him back when he was working at the station here, which, you know, go from station to the broadcast to spot on the coaching staff. One of y'all might be next up, but we'll see. We'll see. You know,
Carmichael
TBD. Carmichael Dave, Alan
Look
Styles.
out.
You know,
Oh, if Allen becomes a person of power in the Kings organization, they will become Golden State Warriors, Northwest, whatever. Like, just they're gonna get Jordan Poole back. I mean, Buddy Hield's gonna come back to Sacramento. It's gonna be pretty gross over here.
yeah, but Doug's wording and messaging does feel different than Mike. You know, I've even noticed almost what feel like little. It's not slights because Doug's not one to do that, but just funny moments considering, you know, everything that went on with Mike Brown a little bit. The Doug coming out and saying it's never going to be the player's fault. It's always going to be on me, you know. And it's not like Mike didn't have a sense of self accountability as well. He would always start with that, but then also publicly hold his players accountable. And I don't think we've quite seen the same thing from Doug. It's just different, a little bit of different messaging. Again, up to this point, it's been 3 games, 1 or 2 practices. So still plenty to be done there. But like taking the team after this first home win that they had, or actually second home win now under Doug Christie, deciding, hey, I'm going to go take these guys up to the base of the beam, you know, the most important part, the totem pole in Sacramento, the purple totem pole in the sky, you know, and give this, it's very Doug. Doug loves the city of Sacramento and wants to succeed for the people here, for the organization and for the city itself. And I think he's trying to relay that messaging to the team of, hey, this beam means a lot to this city. And when you guys win, it's obviously a representation of a larger thing, but expressing how much that means to the team, I think is very, very Doug Christie. And that is a positive in my mind. It's a little cliche. I think even when Mike Brown, not that Mike Brown didn't do that, you know, I think it was easy to see how, man, if he started to lose these guys talking with Mike, I could see how this could all get cheesy. And I think I'm seeing that even earlier in the Doug Christie process, but that just might be because I have a little bit more of a critical eye with how this entire scenario came to be. But what have you guys thought of Doug's messaging, the I love the city, I love the players, and just how his tone has varied compared to what we were accustomed to with Mike?
Well, I mean, just starting with that practice the other day, and you know, I had like an exchange with someone on Twitter because I said it was a laid back practice, or you know, the vibes were good, and vibes were high, and like, you know, we go to a lot of practices, and usually we walk in, it's business as usual, and you know, things are kind of just, you know, hum ho, everyone's doing their job, doing their work. There was even at a time where the tension seems like it's so, you know, intense right now. It really was a fun-filled, laid back. I mean, Brenden, you posted a video of Trey Lyles and the guys kind of having some fun, and the music choice was different. It was way more laid back and just kind of, you know, Doug's, you know, walking around with hands in his pockets, kind of, you know, suddenly like kind of dancing, hopping around. Like it was a very laid back, different kind of vibe that we're used to, especially at a time where, you know, all the alarms are being rung. So just starting off with that is kind of just, again, getting back to Doug being Doug and Doug being laid back and Doug being, you know, a loving guy. And I think the first thing he opened with in his first pregame presser at home about the fans was, he was asked, do you have a message to the fan base? And he's like, well, I love you. Like, I love you. And I believe it. I believe that Doug Christie really does love this fan base, this city. It's been a home to him. And he's spent more time here than anywhere else. I mean, he obviously was a player here, been a broadcaster with us on NBC Sports, assistant coach, now head coach. I mean, I think that it's a little deeper for Doug, and it's not just a job. It's, proving himself and kind of more so adding to his legacy. And, not that it's all about him, but I think that the good part of that, and we've talked about, I think last week, about how the inexperience maybe will be an issue, and maybe it will. I mean, again, it's been 3 games, but you can't say he doesn't care. You can't say he's getting this job and he's going to kick his feet up, even if it's for 50 games, and say, okay, I'm head coach of the Sacramento Kings. I get to check that off my list and add that to my resume, and then, skip on down the line in April or May. He wants us to work. He's a player's coach. The players, as far as we've known, as we've gathered, they do like him. He's very well liked in that locker room. And we've seen a lot of times with player coaches in the NBA and in sports in general, there's been some situations where it doesn't always work out, but more times than not, players are really receptive to former players. I mean, there's not many people in the game that can see basketball through a lens that they can themselves. And Doug can do that. Doug's been in every situation you can think of. He's been in rebuilding situations, like in Toronto. He's played for the Lakers under the bright lights. He's played with the Knicks as a young player. He played in Sacramento at the peak of basketball here. And I think seeing him do kind of the things he did last night, like take the team up there, is it a little cheesy? Sure, but that's just who Doug is. And kind of like how Mike was too. We a lot of things that Mike did, we say that's kind of cheesy, but kind of like dad humor, dad energy, whatever you want to call it. But it felt kind of different last night, seeing, it all kind of unfold. And I feel like there is like a buy-in, an early buy-in, and we'll see if it continues. But I do think that, the players are being responsive to Doug, and as the background noise kind of continues to dissipate, maybe this team can pull itself up and rally. But I think last night, just kind of when their Kings PR team poked their head in and told us in the media room, it's gonna be a few minutes, which has never happened before. We've never had someone come in and say, hey, like, I know, like, post games, ready to go, but you guys are ready, but we're gonna need a few minutes. Because usually guys roll out there, they want to get it over with and get on with their nights and recovery. We waited about 4 or 5 minutes, and just saying that was the case was pretty encouraging. I'm not sure if you guys took it the same way, but I mean, I personally think that that's a great thing. That's a great dynamic for this team and a great kind of building block for the chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely kind of feel, I think I'm kind of in the middle of where both of you guys are at. I think it was an incredibly awesome moment. I think it's something that I definitely think was kind of needed in a weird way. Maybe not that specific gesture, but I do think that some sort of centering was needed for this team, for them to just kind of, I don't know. I don't think relax is necessarily the right thing, but just kind of understand sometimes that it is bigger. It's bigger than what's going on the floor, but even though the world might feel like it's currently crashing down on you, there's so many people outside of all of this, and just kind of remembering that, yeah, like, you're not just playing for yourself, you're playing for the name across the front and the name on the back as well. But yeah, I just kind of feel like you guys have kind of framed it perfectly. It is very, very, very Doug Christie of him to do something like that in the best way possible. Like, he is very legitimate. He is very cheesy. I won't say he's corny, but he is definitely somebody who is just authentic. I think is when you spend any amount of time with Doug, and yeah, Frankie, you and I have had the pleasure of just kind of being around him. We never were, popping in during breaks or anything like that and having extensive conversations, but just, being out in the public, and, we would do street hits or whatever, golf tournaments, and we would just have to be around Doug, and everybody loves Doug. Everyone who sees Doug is always super excited to see him. And I can just tell you that he's never been illegitimate for a second. I've never seen him, shake somebody's hand and then be like, this guy over here, like, how annoying was that? Doug loves this city, like you guys said. He legitimately loves this team. He legitimately wants the best for what's going to happen here. But the sports side of me, the fact that I watch other sports and I kind of know how sometimes these new head coaching situations can go, I do kind of see a lot of the things Brendan's saying. I do think that Yes, it's one of those things that when you are a new coach, it's awesome. It feels like a vibe change, but this also feels very similar to Turn the Jets On and things like that, where Mike Brown did bring an energy, but at some point it clearly got stale. I think it's great immediately, but that's all we have to worry about right now. The long-term stuff we've clearly seen. We don't even know if this team knows what their long-term future plans are. So Doug has definitely not lost this group. I think that's the most important thing that he can do and has done, is that when you lose a head coach, a lot of people tend to think that, and as the reporting has been or tried to be, a lot of people assume that means you've lost the locker room. And I think it's just very clear that, like you guys have said, Doug has not lost this locker room even a little bit. And who knows, maybe these, I don't want to call them antics, but yeah, his energy, I will say, might wear thin on some people at some point. Everybody kind of gets tired of people when you hang around them enough. And even though Doug's a great person, I'm sure, when you're in charge, you have to ruffle some feathers. I just feel like right now it is good. He's probably the best person to try and handle this kind of delicate situation. But at the same time, I just kind of know that this is what happens when you fire a coach and then get a new coach in the middle of the season. There is a different energy. There is a little bit of freshening up, but the problem is it doesn't last forever. And we think that with Doug, it'll last a good amount of time because he is so authentic. He is so legitimate. But at some point here, the new coach energy is going to wear off. And like you guys have said, I mean, I was at the game yesterday as a fan against the Sixers. That game was not fun. That was not a well-played basketball game at all. They ended up winning the game by keeping it close and then having a huge, you could argue, impossible run, 15-0. I saw a stat that said that the Kings are the only team in NBA history to make the run they did. It was 15 points, didn't allow a single point. Essentially the Kings had to play a perfect last 4 minutes in order to win that game. You can give credit to Doug, whatever you want to say, but that was not a well-performed game yesterday, and I more say that to say I don't think that this team has turned some corner. I don't think that we're going to see any sort of new Sacramento Kings unless they make a trade. This problem has not been solved. So I'm glad they're 2-1. I'm glad that Doug isn't crumbling amongst what should be a collapsing tower, but I'm not necessarily under any illusion that this team is any different.
Yeah, the reality of that game that you just laid out, the Dallas game that I mentioned earlier, and how many guys were out in that one. There was a point towards the end of the first quarter where PJ Washington had as many points as the entire Kings team, and Spencer Dinwiddie was just absolutely frying them as well. I'm not convinced that if Mike Brown's here, they don't win these games, but I think that there's just some notable different wording, like you guys pointed out. I will say, right when the video came out or the picture came out of them up at the beam in our group chat, I was joking right away about how this is very, Drake when Toronto, they won their game in the Eastern Conference Finals or something.
Yep,
Drake's
Eastern Conference Finals.
Look around. None of this existed before us. And it just, feels very similar to the Doug Christie thing here. But I think it is a good shift in energy. Chris, I think largely your point also of when there's a coaching change like this, you could see things spiral. And I don't think that we're seeing that, which is a very encouraging sign. And some interesting messaging from all the players throughout all of this. So I think we mentioned it before. I know we did on the last episode, but De'Aaron Fox, not part of the decision at all to move on from Mike Brown. That's not to say that his, public requests or questions about the organization and what that may mean for his future through Rich Paul and his agency didn't contribute to it at all. But I don't think De'Aaron directly, we know De'Aaron did not directly go and have any say in this. I don't think Domas did, DeMar, anybody on the roster. These guys found out minutes before we did, really. Also on the way to get on the plane to go to LA. Some of them already on the plane, for example. So just to get that out the way, and De'Aaron does like Doug from everything we've gathered. Like you guys said, everybody seems to like Doug. There's not a person I've heard that doesn't like Doug, at very least as a person. Now, questions about his, maybe resume going into a head coaching spot are a separate thing. But also, as I was talking to people about that yesterday, it's not the most atypical thing. and I don't know exactly how to feel about it, but like JJ Redick didn't have prior coaching experience. Chauncey Billups didn't have prior coaching experience. I think that there's a handful of examples where this ends up being a case, and guys can turn out to be okay. So we'll see. But the interim head coach thing that I think that we've mentioned before as well, the only examples I previously could think of were Joe Mazzulla taking over a team that was already championship caliber, saying, hey, we're pretty good. Maybe we should just keep doing the same thing. And with some changes, right? And then the Cleveland Cavaliers, Ty Lue takes over for David Blatt. Helps when you have LeBron James and Kyrie Irving on your team. And what do you know? Ty Lue turns out to be a great coach. And maybe you can get lucky like that, but that seems like an outlier. The one that I realized a little bit after the fact is I believe it's the 2020-21 Hawks that had Lloyd Pierce until they were 22 and 22, a little bit. It's either before or after the All-Star break in that range. And they move on from him and promote Nate McMillan. Now, different than Doug Christie, because Nate McMillan had been a head coach in the NBA for a good while before that and an assistant on staffs as well. But the Supersonics, he was head coach of for a while, Portland Trailblazers. And then he comes in and sort of changes the energy with that group. And they end up making a run to the Eastern Conference Finals. And ironically enough, Kevin Huerter was on that team. So asked him a little bit about that in the locker room the other day, and actually have that audio here. So Kevin Huerter on, how an interim could turn things around sometimes.
Season around in a way.
Yeah, to be honest, there's a lot for sure. Ours, I remember back in the day was, it happened right before All-Star break, and I think we won 7 in a row. So, this is kind of similar a little bit earlier in the season, but I don't know. Sometimes there's a change of energy is all you need. It's not like the rest of that season in Atlanta, we change everything we're doing X's and O's, or just an energy shift, and we'll see if a similar thing can happen here.
How much have you seen Doug try to bring that energy? I mean, we see the messaging up there on the board, former player. How much do you feel like he brings that to the team?
Yeah, he is. He's a fiery guy. He is how you guys remember him as a player. That's kind of how he is as a coach, like us in this locker room against the world. And like he truly believes that. He truly means that. He was a coach, I think, when he was sitting on the sidelines. A lot of players were really close to them, and a guy that's been a player before, so we can relate to a lot of stuff we're doing. And now that he's in the chair, that should continue. But I think most guys have a good relationship with him.
Not 7 in a row quite, Kevin, but 7 out of 8. I'll give it to him. Not bad at all. I'm being a little picky here.
But you did the legwork. You looked it up, huh?
I did for half a second. My Celtics, my previous Celtics fandom is coming out here a little bit.
Oh,
but
previous, huh?
It makes me think very much of, and this is mainly a joke, I guess, but when Jaylen Brown, the first time that the Celtics made their finals run with this core, right, and ended up losing to the Warriors, midseason, Jaylen Brown tweeted, "The energy is shifting." And that became like a running joke for the rest of the year, because it kind of did from that point on. Funnily enough, Jaylen Brown ends up making shirts. Point being, I think we need shirts. We've seen the no class, no balls shirts. Mike Malone, great comment. All-time comment.
Hall of Fame comment. Hall of Fame comment.
Elite from, did I say Mike Brown? Mike Malone on Mike Brown. So I don't know. Do we put any stock into this idea of the energy shifting? I guess it's kind of what we just talked about. It does feel a little bit different right now, but it's 3 games.
It's a little early. I think that the on-court signs, like, I have my binoculars up at, our media row, and I've really been trying to do it. Like, I kind of taken a page out of Sam Amick's book, who does the same thing. We talked about it a little bit, and he's mentioned that he looks for body language and kind of things of that nature. And I've been looking at a lot of that lately, just around the court. And last night there was a lot of positive body language and a lot of emotion on the sidelines. And, Doug gets really into it when he's, on the sideline, and he was a passionate player. He's bringing that as a coach as well. But I will say that it's good to win games. Winning games is important. They both were pretty ugly wins, all things being said. I mean, they shoot, I think, 29% or 28% from 3 last night. Not really how you want to draw it up. And a team that the trends that have been hurting them are continuing to kind of be there, I guess is my point. Like, they're still shooting poorly from 3. They're defending 3 pretty horribly. They did a good job in the fourth quarter. They sealed things off. They took Paul George out of the game. Tyrese Maxey couldn't really get fully comfortable. So that helps. But I think it's, to bring up the Aaron Boone quote, it's right in front of us. Like, It's right in front of them. I mean, if they can pick up a win on Friday again against a team that, like the Dallas Mavericks, like the Philadelphia 76ers, the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be shorthanded on Friday. They're not going to have Ja Morant, among others. I'm not sure Brandon Clark's going to be playing. There's a couple other injuries they're dealing with, but Ja Morant won't be playing. So those are 3 potential games that could be wins on bringing your record up from 5-6 games under against shorthanded teams. And I think kind of the same way the Kings were struggling earlier with injuries of their own, teams aren't going to feel sorry for you. The Kings shouldn't feel sorry for them either. They should look at what's in front of them. And, all you can do is control who's right there and, win or not, that's going to change the momentum. And has the energy shifted? I think the energy has shifted compared to where it was 6 days ago, but that energy it's very volatile. That energy can drop super quick. One ugly loss to Memphis on Friday, and we're back right having these same conversations saying they're 2-2 since firing Mike. They're spinning their wheels. But if they win again, it's like they're 3-1 since firing Mike, and they're winning games at home. So it really is an interesting case, like how quick the conversations can change, because, I mean, it's really game by game and day by day. But I'll say that right now, today on Friday, January 2nd, the energy does seem like it's shifting. And that's a good thing. And the Kings need to ride that, because if they do, all that background noise of De'Aaron Fox's future, which will be, dealt with at a later date, but it doesn't have to be such a pressing matter right now that your star player is unhappy and maybe he's going to ask out. And maybe the fact that you're winning again, winning solves everything. That's a long saying in sports, in every sport, really. Winning solves everything. And if the Kings can win some games and maybe make a move or two, there's no reason why they can't be back where they should have been, when we were talking about them in October, being in the middle of the pack in the West. It's really not that far. I think they're 3.5 games out of the 6 or 7 seed right now. Golden State and Phoenix are both kind of spinning their tires. They're treading water around the same area the Kings are. I mean, the Pacific Division is kind of a mess as a whole, but that should be, the Kings' benefit. That the fact that you have a lot of basketball to be played, you're changing some narratives, and you're having a little different change in, kind of just in-house structure and how everyone's feeling. So it's early, but the signs are positive. You can't deny that the signs are a little bit positive through 3 games. Now you got to see if it can matter going forward.
As we kind of talked about the potential of this locker room going bad, I did just kind of get reminded, I guess in maybe a sliding glass doors moment, you could possibly call it. How different is today if the Kings lose to Dallas the other day, with De'Aaron having that moment that has just been wiped from the internet? It's not wiped from the internet. There's actually a fantastic picture on Getty of it. De'Aaron Fox, I don't know what to call it, but we'll just say pushing off Domantas Sabonis as Sabonis is trying to wrangle De'Aaron Fox in, because he is just, frankly, playing like a maniac. He's fouling like a crazy person in that Dallas game. I think he had 5. I think that must have been his 5th foul that he had picked up in that moment. Starts arguing, walks up to the referee. Sabonis, as we've seen him do a couple different times throughout his Kings tenure here, walks over, tries to move De'Aaron Fox, just kind of try to push him towards the bench a little bit. Ends up kind of realizing, like, oh, De'Aaron might get kicked out of this game right now. He kind of wraps him up, kind of hugs him up a little bit. De'Aaron very forcefully, very much so, like, we've all been in a situation where somebody tells you to chill and that only escalates you to another anger level. You could see that moment happen for De'Aaron, where Sabonis was like, just go to the bench, man, chill. Like, it's good. We need you. And De'Aaron's like, I'm chill. Like, I'm good. Like, I got this. And kind of pushes him away. And I just felt like, and at that time, I believe the Kings were losing and kind of had to have a nice little comeback against that really down Dallas team. I don't know. I just kind of think if, as De'Aaron kind of mentioned the other day, oh, funny how, all of a sudden it's all negative and now everybody in national media is talking about us. I could literally see that happening. The Kings losing their first 2 games under Doug Christie, and that specific moment being shown over and over and over and over again on NBA TV. Those are just kind of the moments where I am hesitant to say that anything's fixed. But to go to the energy shift thing, I would also say that energy shift kind of implies that the energy wasn't great before. And so I don't know if there has been an energy shift. I think it just kind of depends on, and we have all heard, I think, different things these past couple days about maybe where certain players' energy was and maybe how many players felt that way. But I think if you feel like there was an energy shift with Doug Christie, I think that means that you feel obviously that there were multiple players that just were completely fed up with Mike Brown. And that's where I personally, I know there's a couple players that weren't fond of him, but I just don't think that the energy went from one side of the room to the other. If anything, I think it went like 3/4 of the way in the room to, it's again it's again on, filling up that remaining side. Like I just never felt like the energy was completely on one end and had to be shifted to the other. To me, it felt like it was neutral, if not still slightly leaning positive. And so I don't know if I would say the energy is shifted.
I think that's fair. I think, first of all, your point of it being a very fine line, like if this is a win versus a loss, what gets highlighted? If Jaden Ivey misses that free throw, on the 4-point play.
By the way, Jaden Ivey out for the season too.
Yeah, that one looked a little crazy, by the way. Wishing the best for Jaden Ivey. But it is a very thin line with that stuff. And I think to your point of like where specifically the energy should be shifting, which I love this wording, by the way. It's the most vague, could mean anything wording. It's great. I'll just say, okay, so we know that De'Aaron Fox had nothing to do with the Mike Brown firing. I think it's been very, very clear that it is a fact. I think it's been very, very clear that he had obviously nothing to do part of it, but also you can read where some of these, the difference between some of these guys. De'Aaron's comments after the fact have been very, what you said, now everybody wants to talk about it because we're bad, or De'Aaron just kind of saying, did your feelings change at all from when this offseason and you talked about how you like the continuity on this team? And he just full response, not at all, and I'll just say I've heard that Domas is somebody that maybe was, unsure about Mike Brown, and DeMar DeRozan in that group a little bit as well to a lesser extent. But for a handful of reasons, there's a whole lot of practicing that Mike Brown did. And guess what? Today, Mike Brown would be practicing. The Kings are not practicing today. And this is maybe one of those former player things where Doug can kind of get a feel for some of that stuff a little bit. Not that one is necessarily better than the other, but that's a little different. And I think some guys didn't like that Mike Brown had the more like Thibodeau style of, hey, you guys are playing a whole lot of minutes, which that is result of roster construction, as we've seen specifically this season, that be highlighted. But also they practice literally every chance they get. They'll practice on game day or on travel days before they get on the plane. Not that any of this is atypical, but it's literally every opportunity that they can, unless it's a back-to-back or just looking at the scheduling, it'd be ridiculous to practice on this day. And even sometimes Mike is still practicing then. So not practicing today feels like a little bit of a difference. And I'll just say for the Domas one specifically has stood out to me, right? And how his potential relationship with Mike Brown may have been. But specifically, or it goes hand in hand, like Doug Christie is his guy. Doug Christie, each assistant on the staff is assigned to a player. And hey, this is your guy. This is the one you're overseeing throughout this whole year, working at him with in the off season. If they want to stay late, they're staying with you. Doug Christie was Domantas Sabonis' guy, and vice versa. And I think you can read between the lines a little bit with some of Domas's comments. Now, there's been like more larger things and whispers, I guess, behind the scenes of potential reasonings. But just, I would say from a fan perspective, you're trying to figure out what this means. You have to read between the lines a little bit here with Domas. And I would say, for example, maybe the most prime example yesterday is when he's asked about their run to end the game. He says that with a few minutes left, Doug Christie called the timeout and said, guys, we got to get 3 stops and win this game. And we got 3 stops and won the game. I'm like, oh, okay, Domas. Mike Brown just told y'all not to foul a 3-point shooter or to foul on the floor. Or Mike Brown just told you at the beginning of a game to, or just, the importance of boxing out Anthony Davis on this free throw at the end of the game, or the beginning of the game against Denver to not allow them to get in the paint and get easy back cuts. And they didn't do it. And so, like, I can't help but chuckle in there, to myself, obviously, not to Domas's face or anything, but at the idea of, like, Doug Christie just really did so much in that fourth quarter by saying, hey, you know what we should do? We should try to get them to stop scoring points. Like, I get that I'm simplifying it here, and the way that the message is expressed matters. And there was a clear difference in results, which matters here as well. But that's a comment that stands out to me a little bit. Or when I asked him about Keon Ellis, Domantas Sabonis, and he's essentially says, I'm paraphrasing very much here, that like Keon's always been this guy. Keon could always do this. And again, if you already are kind of have the ear of, I don't think Domas really liked Mike Brown, and I think he probably is a fan of this change, that sounds a little like, hey, maybe Keon should have been playing this much the whole time. This is the most minutes he played all season. It's the second most minutes he's played in his career outside of a game against Dallas last season. And, so I think that's interesting. Is all. And I'm curious how much we've talked about it, but just what's your thoughts on, I know that I'm like reading between the lines here, but it's in combination with everything else we've kind of heard in the background.
I mean, if it's as simple as telling them to get stops. Just tell them to start winning some games, man. I mean, if they're going to respond, just say, let's win some games. No, I do think, and even thinking like while you're saying that, like, I don't think Domas really even openly, or not many players, I guess, really, and it's not really a knock on Mike. It's just like didn't really, credit Mike or allude to Mike or point out in-game changes or strategies that Mike was implementing. And I think maybe Domas's points about the game we're reading into him more because of all that's happening, but they do seem a bit pointed that, he's mentioned Doug a couple of times now in post-game interviews, the past 2 games specifically. He's brought up Doug twice now. And to me, that just shows like one of your best players fully buying in. And like you mentioned, these guys are very acclimated. They know each other very well. And, there's been a lot of background noise about Domas and Mike, and that other side of that, there's been a lot of background noise about how much Domas loves and supports, the fact the possibility of Doug being head coach. So I feel like we could see more buy-in for some players. And even like you mentioned, the practice thing, we've heard for a while now that, Mike Brown loves practice. I think the first week he was here as a head coach, when we had our, we talking to the PR staff about like how many times we're going to be coming in for media availability. It was like every single day for like 5-6 days in a row during training camp. And even into the beginning of the season, we're like, man, these guys like to practice. And, just thinking back to, and this is their job. They get paid a lot of money to do this. I fully understand that. There's no, boohoo. I get it. But like even back to when, we were all playing sports at one time in life. It's like at some point you need a break. You need a little bit of a breather. You need some downtime. And I think Doug recognizes that. He was a player. He's been through it. He knows when his guys need a break because he's been through it himself. And even the preparation work, as far as I think Katie was on this morning with J. Ross, and they were talking about how the game in Boston, they're going to get to Boston because I think they have 2 or 3 days off before, I think, the Boston game. They're going to get there a day early to have a day just to get acclimated with the time change. Then the next day they're going to have practice, and then they're going to play. So they're not going to practice and go through workouts and get all these prep things done, which I think is beneficial in some ways too. I mean, the Kings have had the record they had when Mike Brown was here. They were a winning product for the first time in almost 2 decades. So I can't sit here and say what Mike Brown was doing in his prep work was wrong. But there's a breaking point for some people and for some guys. And I think that maybe for some guys on the team this year, they hit a breaking point and they kind of wanted to hit the brakes and say, man, like we're getting beaten the ground by our own staff here, which we don't know if that's for sure or not. I'm just saying that's pure speculation. But what we do know is there are some players that did not love the amount of practices and they needed a little bit of a break. And like you mentioned, Brenden, like I didn't even think it was a question. Day off in between games and you're at home on a homestand, there'll be practice 10 times out of 10 with Mike being here. And we'll see how beneficial that was tomorrow. Does a day off to kind of clear the mind and rest the body? Does that really help? We'll see.
They have had a lot of injuries this year, for what it's worth.
And
but
they're dealing with,
they didn't have very many injuries the first Beam Team year, and they practiced just as much
every day. And Keegan's ankle for sure is one that, like, apparently it's a nagging thing and it doesn't have a quick fix. So we'll see if maybe a couple of days off does him any good. But I do think that having a head coach that's been a player before, this side of it can help because they know more than anybody about what the players are feeling in every situation, back-to-backs, road trips, homestands, losing streaks down the line, like what's beneficial and what works, because they've been through it with different head coaches. And Doug especially, who's been in every situation you could think of. Like I mentioned, New York, the Lakers, rebuilding Toronto team, best team in the league in Sacramento, as an aging veteran in Dallas and with the Clippers. Like he's been through every single thing you can think of. So he knows what his guys are wanting probably more than others. And, at this point, I think that you kind of have to trust him until you don't anymore.
It's a little bit like again, like the new coach syndrome, I think, where, it was viewed as a positive when Mike first got here that they practiced so much. The guys never really, especially Malik Monk, was always super vocal about not being the biggest fan. But during that first season, at least I would say from an outsider, again, players never really are going to enjoy doing practice as much as they do. But I think a lot of people viewed it as, it's definitely sucks and it can have some negative effects like fatigue. But for the most part, they're playing well, and I think a lot of us attribute it to the fact that they were practicing so much. And so I think it's, again, something where, Mike's going to continue to ride that, and then Doug, being the new guy, says, here's a clear and obvious way in which I can be different. I can kind of put my stamp on things, and all the player coach things that you kind of listed out there are definitely true, and I think that's going to be the key to Doug's success. If he is going to be successful, it's understanding that it's not just always being the player's coach. Like it is, you have to at some point, and I'm not saying, Doug is being super substitute teacher or anything like that, but I think he's, going to have to say that, as a player, I probably would want today off, but I don't know if we're playing well enough, if I feel like we're sharp enough, if, and if I wanted to use this as an example, I do agree with you guys that this is probably a much needed break, but he could also say, I kind of want to implement some stuff of my own here, and I'm not going to have much practice time to kind of get you guys to how I want to play. And so maybe I do feel like you guys need to practice. That's the part where I think Doug is going to have to find his voice and just kind of learn as you go, like what are the right buttons to push at the right moment. Because again, I just think everything feels so fresh and new right now, and everybody loves Doug. And again, not calling him the substitute teacher, but everybody always loves the backup quarterback, right? Like everybody is always like, if that guy were in charge, everything would be great. And, sometimes it is great for a couple weeks, but then reality kind of sinks in, and then Doug is no longer your friend. It's no longer the guy who is your coach, but also is the guy you can kind of be a confidant with. He then just kind of turns into yet another coach that you've had. So I don't know. I think that, again, it's just I think I need to see more from all of this situation to just kind of be bought in. But, I just think it's a really interesting situation where Doug has kind of tried to separate himself from Mike, and even if it's intentional or not.
For sure. Definitely just some, fundamental differences, I think, between the guys and how they may function that we're picking up on. And we will more so, obviously, as time passes here. You said the backup quarterback thing, and it made me think of is it Key and Peele sketch where the starting quarterback's on the sideline, like hearing the guy get hyped up?
I have not seen that.
You've never seen this? It's
No.
like, or maybe it's not Key and Peele. It might be, what is it, RDC World, right? With Mark Phillips. Where the starting quarterback goes gets pulled, backup comes in.
And he's like, we were not doing that before. Like,
the bench is like, oh my God, this guy's throwing dimes. Like, he's like, all right, relax.
Right,
like,
I was doing that too. I was doing some stuff like that.
Is that Mike Brown right now, at home?
Oh, for sure.
Hey.
I was telling y'all
Trey Lyles never played like
3
this.
straight stops. Come on.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say before we go on to a little bit of like trade conversation, that's how we can close this out. There's a lot of smoke around Cam Johnson and Kings interacting with the Nets right now. Is this has been a very messy breakup, I guess, through media wise. And I don't think that's the media's fault. I think that like the whole De'Aaron Fox narrative needing to be dispelled. He had to come out publicly and say, hey, I had nothing to do with this, guys. Why is everybody on me about this? And I see how from the outside you connect those dots and assume that, De'Aaron had something to do with it. Again, his request of let's get better or I'm out of here probably did have something to do with this, but that's not De'Aaron saying anything about Mike Brown. He made it clear that he wanted Mike Brown here this offseason, and I don't think those feelings changed at all. Again, I think he likes Doug. But then all this Domas stuff, and like, if the front office would just come out and the guys that reportedly fired Mike Brown, I'm a little unsure, but that's what we're going with, and that's how they're presenting this. Come out and talk about it. Like, they need to have a press conference. It's ridiculous that that hasn't happened already. It almost feels like they're waiting to make a trade and then like loop that in with it, or waiting for a mini winning streak here. And we're at 2 right now. If they win, the next 3, which you have a beat up Memphis team, who, by the way, John Morant had the worst game of his career earlier this year and got ejected against the Kings, and Memphis still beat them. And then you got back-to-back games against the Warriors, one on the road and one at home. Say you win these, like, oh, now are we going to have a press conference because the spirits are high? Like, it needs to be talked about. And I think that so much of this would be less messy. Not that there still wouldn't be, obviously, things that come with a press conference. There's going to be reactions to it. This is how it works. But like, these guys need to have a sense of accountability and just talk about the decision that you just made. Why is it Doug Christie? Why did you let go of Mike Brown? Don't you feel like this roster needs help anyways? Why is it getting put on Mike? Like, that needs to happen. If you guys want to comment on that, don't feel like you have to, but feel free. But I think it's absolutely ridiculous that they have not had a press conference yet. And I'm sure it will happen. I've been trying to get my bearings on, like, am I crazy, or is this, don't you always do this after a firing? And like, I'll tell you, I asked Sam Amick yesterday. He's like, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. Every single team has a firing right after, or has a press conference right after firing their head coach. Like, the front office needs to speak on this, and they haven't at all. And Sam kind of tore them apart on The Athletic today.
Yeah, we're still like relatively, I guess, young in our media careers and like learning the ropes and like picking up new things every year. But we do know that the people that have been around for a very long time and that are very well respected, and 2 of them, Brenden, who you're very close with, is Sean Cunningham, and then obviously Sam Amick, who, like you mentioned today, wrote an article in The Athletic, pretty much ripping the Kings, and then came on our airwaves on 1140 with J. Ross this morning and ripped them apart, in video/audio format, and just kind of saying that this is not how a healthy organization is run. And yeah, this was a pretty horrible thing that happened. It was pretty inconvenient, and it was, the one line they put out in their statement in their release last week was for Monty McNair saying it was a hard decision. I'm sure it was. I don't think anyone disagrees it was a hard decision. Why, though? Tell us why the decision was made and what thought went into it. Why was it the right time? And why are you letting your players have to answer these questions every day and be the front-facing people to deal with this problem? And that's kind of the way I look at it, is like, when you look at players that are evaluating Sacramento, and DeMar DeRozan chose Sacramento because of the goodwill they built up and their reputation had been repaired over the years. How does this look to people watching them hang their players out to dry? And they might not see it that way. And if they don't see it that way, that's fine. They're wrong. Like, but you're wrong if you don't.
Fox probably sees it that way. How does Fox feel?
They're completely wrong if they don't see it that way. If they don't see it as they're hanging their players out to dry, sorry, there's not even like a conversation. You're wrong. Like, these guys are having to answer questions every single day about something they had nothing to do with. And they really didn't. No player went in there into Monty McNair's office and banged their fist down. And that includes Domantas Sabonis, for the record. No one went in there and said, hey, Mike's got to go or I'm going to cause problems. This came from the top. It came from Vivek Randive. It came from Monty McNair. It came through Wes Wilcox. It came through the channels. And while it was all happening, by the way, Vivek Randive was on vacation in Cabo, Cancun. I have no idea. Showed up with a nice tan last night. And, I just think that we're past the point now where, even if they have a press conference, which doesn't mean they shouldn't, but even if they were to have one today, if we got an email right now saying there's a press conference in the afternoon, it's a horrible look. And every day that goes by, it looks worse and worse and worse. So like you mentioned, and that's the way I kind of speculated the whole time, they are waiting for kind of that, like, here's the bad news, but here's some good news too. The bad news is we fired Mike Brown, and we're really sorry about it because it was a horrible look, and we fired him in the car and got ridiculed by all national media. But here's the good news. We traded for Cam Johnson or Isaiah Stewart or whoever else they're trying to get on the trade market. So I just feel like no matter what they do, even if they do make a trade for Cam Johnson, which, that'd be great. That'd help the Kings, I'm sure. And we'll see what we'll talk about that in a minute, I think. But the optics surrounding this whole situation have only hurt the Kings, and there's no easy fix for that. And that alone is going to take time and it's going to take another effort from the organization to remend itself going forward. So hopefully they decide to do it sooner than later. But it is interesting. You're not just seeing fans, go at the organization. You're not seeing, newish people in the media go at it. You're seeing people that have been covering the Kings for decades, not even exaggerating, decades, that are covering the team saying, you need to be better. You messed up.
Yeah, Frankie, I think the point that you made at the start of all that was definitely the biggest reason why. I mean, I get, especially when you're not a part of media, which is apparently a bad word these days. People just think that it's us complaining that, oh, we don't get access to Monty McNair. Like, oh, we want to talk to Monty McNair so he can tell us nothing, but we can say that's not what it's about. It's about exactly what you said, Frankie. It's the fact that he's leaving his players out to dry. It's the fact that if you don't care, if you think, again, like press conferences in general are pointless and they don't serve a purpose, how about, we talked about it last week when it comes to Mike Brown with the firing and how that's going to ripple across the NBA and in the inner circles. Well, you know what? If I'm a player, I'm going to say, especially a star player, I'm going to say, did you see how they left them out to dry? You think I want to answer for that? You think I want people asking me if I got my coach fired, a guy that I actually like? It's one thing if I'm indifferent. It's one thing if it's Dave Yeager or Luke Walton, the guy that, whatever, they're my coach, but I don't really, there was no real personal relationship. There is a personal relationship, even if it's not, hey, we text every day or whatever it is. Like Mike Brown cared about De'Aaron Fox, and just at a different level than what your typical coach player is. And I just feel like it's a really bad look from the internal stuff. It's a bad look from people who are in the NBA and know how things are supposed to go. The fact that the Kings aren't just operating like a normal franchise, that's the kind of thing that ends up hurting you for the next, I don't know, let's just throw 16 to 17 seasons. That's how you end up in situations like that where nobody wants to come help you, is because you put yourself in a situation where you're embarrassing yourself for no reason whatsoever. And really from Monty McNair's standpoint, he should be embarrassed. This is crazy. It is, it's accountability. You're the general manager. You are supposed to be, in a way, the face of an organization. And he's been everything but that. I mean, he pops up twice a year max to come talk, one of which will be, and by the way, I know people don't love it. I don't love it. Frankie, I know you don't love it as Kings fans, but even if it's something as crazy as, I'm going to call up Dave and me and Dave are going to do a 20-minute, it's better than nothing. And I know that those aren't great. And again, Monty, especially in one-on-ones, really can circle his way around and end up saying nothing. But it's just a certain level of, I need you to sit here and be asked some questions, because even though Monty McNair, again, doesn't give anything in his words, if it's streamed, if it's on video, maybe I can glean something that makes me feel better about this situation, makes me feel like, I don't know, maybe these guys have a freaking plan. Because I think that's the part, again, where last week we had so much confusion is there a plan? Okay, it's one thing that we don't agree with them firing Mike Brown. Are you firing Mike Brown because you know Doug Christie is going to be the permanent guy? Are you firing Mike Brown and you know that you're going to make a move? Is this just a decision that you've been waiting to make and you finally got a green light to do it? We need, as a collective, there are answers that need to be, at least there's questions that need to be asked. Again, I don't know if he's going to answer it or not, but there's some level of accountability that just needs to be had, and you can't just fire people, especially an incredibly successful, you could argue, Mike Brown, third most successful coach in the Sacramento era. You can't just let him go and then not say anything about it, especially when there's no justification. Again, maybe we can live in a universe where if we all see it coming, maybe there's no need to explain it, like a Luke Walton situation, but this is just, it came out of nowhere completely. It felt rushed. It felt like there needed to be an explanation, and the players are the only one who've provided us with anything. And if anything, I think it's been detrimental.
I agree. I think it's unfair to them. I think it's hard to see how De'Aaron Fox or other players would appreciate any of that. And I very much agree with your guys' points.
One more thing too, actually.
Yeah.
how, and I think they've actually done pretty well, and we actually just kind of mentioned their moment, but De'Aaron and Domas, we've kind of been dancing around the fact that they're on two opposite ends of this argument. Again, they seem totally fine. Like yesterday, I saw in the post game, Domas, like, you know, De'Aaron hug-kissed his wife, hug-kissed his kid. Sabonis waited, did his post game, and like hugged him after the game. Like, they're good. But this is, again, the type of thing where you have one side and one side. You could split your locker room, split your star players over doing something like this. And then especially when De'Aaron's the one getting blamed for it, you could easily see if him and Sabonis had even a slightly worse relationship, him going to Sabonis' locker and being like, hey, man, like, you want to take some of the brunt of this? Because I'm the only one getting it, and you and I both know that if anybody had anything to do with this, it's at least more so you than I.
For sure. I think it's definitely something I'm sort of, you know, keeping my ears perked for, keeping tabs on, I guess you would say, because it is interesting. They're on different sides. Doesn't necessarily speak to their relationship or anything like you're saying, but just an interesting note for sure. They need to have a press conference, point being. And I think also it's hard to imagine Doug Christie really turning this season around without any sort of move being made. And in the pieces that have come out since Mike's firing, I think even the front office has expressed in some of those athletic pieces, like, we know we need to get better, that we have to make a deal before this deadline. And there is a lot of smoke around Cameron Johnson right now. That's been the case for like a month, really. And it seemed like Dorian Finney-Smith was also part of that as well, for what it's worth. But he ends up getting traded to the Lakers for D'Angelo Russell, Max Lewis, got that mixed up. The Pepperdine guy, by the way, shout out Doug, and 3 second-round picks, which the Kings don't have 3 second-round picks. And I also don't know that they have like a D'Lo on this team, for what it's worth. Brooklyn probably the only place that would be overly excited about getting D'Lo back, at least from a fan base perspective. He's kind of doing his career in 2 times over. You know, is he going to end up on Golden State for 30 games and then go back to, or was it after that? Minnesota, I think, is actually where he spent most of his career. Maybe Lakers now. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening there. But a lot of smoke around Cam Johnson to the Kings with DFS now off the table as well. Maybe we'll start here with Sam Amick did join Jason Ross this morning on our airwave Sactown Sports, and we're recording this Thursday morning, for what it's worth, and kind of outlined a little bit of what's going on with the Cam Johnson situation here. So a little over 2-minute clip. We got to have a sec here of Sam diving into sort of what he's been hearing recently.
Things that they just had, but you know, kind of the optics of the move that they made and dismissing Mike Brown. One of my thoughts, Sam, was that, you know, teams make those moves, and a lot of times it's with, you know, handful of games to go, 15 to go, and you're just like, let's just finish out the year. Let's kind of see what we've got and reboot and start fresh. To me, my feeling was this organization has always felt they've got enough and they should be winning more than they are, and you make this move to try to still salvage this year. So kind of with that as a backdrop, would there be more additional pressure on the front office to add to De'Aaron instead, or add to this roster to, one, try to improve the record, and 2, to maybe entice De'Aaron to, even though he hasn't expressed an interest to leave, but to try to entice him to stay?
Yeah, they want to add for sure. In fact, I'm a little confused by, you know, even internally, there's just mixed messaging. This kind of goes back to the culture question is like, you can't have some people, I mean, yes, you're going to have different opinions, but some people acting like this roster is ready-made and good to go, and that the coach was the problem. And then others who are in positions of power admitting, like, no, we need to make some moves. We have some holes, you know, back up 5, 2, 3, 4, like they're looking. That is where there's a lot of nuance with this situation, because I do think, to the front office's credit, you know, you mentioned that ESPN story and the quote about nobody wanted to fire Mike. Mm-hmm. I'm just being honest with you. That is 100% the spirit that I've gotten from that side. And with that in mind, there is an acknowledgement that they need to get better. And so I wrote about Cam Johnson in this piece, and the fact that, you know, Brooklyn and the Kings have had pretty extensive talks on that front. I think, you know, the Nets asking price is still too rich for the Kings' blood. And as we get closer to the deadline, maybe that changes, but he does appear to be somewhat of a priority for them. And they're hoping that Brooklyn changes its stance. You know, there's a bunch of other names we wrote last week, but yeah, they know that this roster is flawed. The DeMar DeRozan move has not been as seamless as they would had hoped for, and they're looking for solutions.
Got yard work going on in the background here. I don't know how much we can hear this. Is it heard at all? Frankie might be muted.
No, I was laughing, to kind of saying Sam's doing yard work or something, I guess, at the end of that clip. Just pull out the leaf blower.
Yeah, might be on my end a little bit. So excuse, I'm not sure how much you can hear that background stuff going
Not
on.
anymore.
But awesome. Well, yeah, I think they may have stopped for half a sec. We'll see.
Okay.
The mixed messaging thing, I guess, real quick, I think goes in line with what we were talking about earlier. I think you're seeing mixed messaging from some of the players. I think that you see in all of the reporting, and Sam's being part of that, as he mentioned, that because these quotes are coming from different places. Like, we don't even know if Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox are on the same page when it comes down to it. And Chris, I think you're muted as well for what it's worth. That we don't even know if those guys are on the same page. We don't know if they're on the same page as ownership. I think we know now they weren't on the same page as Mike Brown. And like that, again, Chris, I thought mentioned it great in the last episode, the horizontal and vertical alignment that Mike Brown was trying to implement that he's seen be a staple in the championship teams he's been on. Kings don't have that. They have actually like the polar opposite of that. And it's very unclear. But Cam Johnson, the idea of Cam Johnson, who's playing really well this year. He has this year and 2 years remaining on his contract. Next year's $20.5 million, the year after $22.5. He's playing solid, 28 years old, almost 29 in about 2 months here, 19 points a game. He's shooting 43% from 49% from the field, 43% from 2 so far this year. Definitely brings you some size that this team desperately needs. I think Keegan Murray not being out there for that last game really showed that, oh my God, this Kings have no other wings. A thing that we knew, but it's so blatantly obvious when Keegan Murray isn't out there and Keon Ellis has to guard Paul George, and then when Keon is on the bench, Kevin Huerter is guarding Paul George, guys. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And you don't have many options. Is what it comes down to. De'Aaron Fox had to do it for a while. I think he's your second best option after Keon Ellis. Trey Lyles had a good game. You don't want to put him on the perimeter. Like, Paul George, as much size as he has, he's a perimeter player, and he will blow by you. And it's like Trey Lyles gets picked on a little bit sometimes. So does Kevin Huerter. But they have no wings on this roster. And the Cam Johnson trade conversation is interesting because we know that this is a coveted guy league-wide coming into this deadline. And so how do the Kings get part of this conversation? They have 1 or 2 second-round picks available to them, and they have about 3 to 4 first-rounders to mess with. Now, only 2 of those could just be straight-up picks. Other 2 would have to be swaps for what it's worth. But an unprotected first-round pick, if we're talking in 2030, 2029, that's interesting. You don't know who's on this team at this point. I forget where I heard this from, but like the 2031 swap that they have with the Spurs right now, right? That was part of that DeMar DeRozan deal. Name me one player you're confident will be on the Kings in 2031.
I absolutely cannot. I can't.
Right. It doesn't exist. And that Victor Wembanyama is going to be on the Spurs in 2031. I mean, barring some craziness, obviously. Maybe knowing is the wrong word.
In his mid-20s, by the way.
Yeah. So I think that's what makes them valuable. But it's also, on the Kings' perspective, what makes it a sticky situation. And I'll let you know that, and I think that this has been reported in other places, like the Nets really like Devin Carter. Devin Carter, who we were all at his Stockton debut, absolutely balled out, by the way. He looked gassed. He said that he's almost 100% in postgame. I'm not really buying it, but that's fine. I like the competitive nature that he's got going on. I think he's going to play in Stockton today, so we'll see how he continues to progress. But I guess long way of saying, like, what are you willing to give up for Cam Johnson, and how do you, assuming Kevin Huerter is the salary match, right? And how do you value from the Kings' perspective? Would you rather give up first round picks, say that's 1 or 2, or Devin Carter?
To me, I feel like with all the noise around Fox, and not to say that Devin Carter is the future and he's why the Kings should feel more confident if you have to move to Aaron Fox, but the fact that you don't really, and I know Malik Monk can play point guard. I get that. But the fact that you don't have like a young kind of prospect, and you and I talked about last night, a controllable asset, because you have Devin Carter on a rookie scale contract and you have his rights and free agency to match any offers. So you really could have him for 7-8 years. That kind of control for a point guard who can do a multitude of things. He can rebound at a high level. He led his conference in rebounding last year. He can shoot the three ball. Even though the form is funky, we've all talked about that. Same thing with Tyrese Halliburton when he came in the NBA. Will it translate? Looks like it may. I mean, again, one G League game and he went, I think, 6 of 8 from 3, or 6 of 9 from 3. We'll see what translates. But he can play defense at a high level. He can defend 1 through 4, maybe 5 in some small ball situations. He's a 6'9", 6'10" wingspan, I think. That's an asset to me that you want to have around when you're potentially on the verge of maybe having to blow it up at some point down the line. That's a player you can build around. And I feel like if you really want to invest in this group, you give up those first round picks and you try to bring in a player like Cam Johnson, who also has a little bit of team control. He has 2 more years after this year for 22 and both at 22 million. That's a pretty strong asset to bring in and pair with Keegan Murray and Devin Carter. And if at some point you do need to hit eject and you have to trade Fox or Sabonis or down the line, you can regain some of those first round picks or pick swaps and kind of just retool that way. But I think that to really kind of have this roster operate at a high level while still not fully putting yourself in a hole for the future, it sounds crazy to say I'd rather give up first round picks than a rookie who might not pan out. But maybe it's a hunch. I don't know. I just feel like if you keep trading away these young controllable players, what are you going to be left with? I mean, Keegan Murray's we're going to see what they do with him this summer. I mean, that might save the Kings some money. I think he's completely right now tanked his value right now. I mean, whatever contract I think last year we were talking about, maybe he could be close to a max. That's not going to happen anymore unless he has a miraculous turnaround to end the year. But I just feel like Devin Carter, the kind of player that he is, we've talked about an ideal running mate with Fox as a 2 guard. I mean, Malik's looked great in a starting role, but if you want to put Malik back in a bench role at some point, Devin Carter is an ideal player that can play defense at a high level, can knock down shots, can rebound. So I think that the deal we've kind of talked about last night, and I don't think this is really fully like a rumor or like a report, but like this maybe more of a hypothetical. The Cam Johnson and Day'Ron Sharp, who would fill a lot of needs. He's a 6'11" big that can rebound and play bring some versatility on the defensive end. Day'Ron Sharp, Cameron Johnson for I think Lyles and Huerter and 2 firsts. I feel like that makes sense to me.
Yeah. I think the hang up is what protections we're talking about potentially.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like 2 first round picks is a lot for a guy like Cam Johnson. I just don't think he's that caliber of player. The inverse of that is the Kings are that desperate. Is I do think it's kind of a weird pickle to be in, because I just think fundamentally, like, he's just not an asset that I would pay 2 first round picks for. I think 1 and Kevin Huerter or something like that is great. If you have to throw in a Trey Lyles, I don't love it. I think you're kind of thinning out your depth a little bit too much there. But to answer, I guess, the overall question, I wouldn't include Devin Carter for everything Frankie said, for sure. Like all the asset management stuff, all the just in break in case of emergency, if De'Aaron Fox is no longer here, like you do need somebody to kind of eat up those minutes. But also, I even think just from how the team is currently constructed, something that really stuck out last night was just it is De'Aaron and Malik as this Kings playmakers. Like DeMar DeRozan has not created in isolation nearly as much as what I was hoping he would. I thought he would create a lot of attention on offense and it would just leave guys wide open from 3, and that just hasn't happened. And so, you're still getting Sabonis, of course, getting those high assist numbers, but he's not running DHOs quite like how he was. And so it really has been a lot of De'Aaron Fox, and honestly, it seems like more so Malik Monk that has gotten others involved in the offense. And I just think that the Kings could desperately, even if they do acquire Cam Johnson, I think you're just going to need the depth that Devin Carter provides. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, when it comes to Cam Johnson, I don't know how this Kings team gets him, because unless they do throw those 2 first round picks in there, I just ultimately, I feel like you're going to regret it in the long term. I just think that he's a really fine player, and then you're bringing him over here at best to be your 3rd scoring option. Realistically, he's probably going to be your 4th or 5th on some nights. So That's just a whole lot to give up for a guy who's that far down the totem pole, in my opinion.
Totem pole episode.
Totem
Totem
pole
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 episode.
talk. Come on.
Pole talk.
Pole talk.
Yep.
Pole talk with the Kings guys.
I agree with like the pickle that you laid out, that 2 firsts is a lot for Cam Johnson. I don't think there's, I was going to say there's not a world where that's worth it, but this is the world. We are in that universe. We're in that timeline currently because there is a desperation point. Yeah. And I think he would help a lot. I think he's really the best thing that they can get out there right now, outside of maybe names that aren't really being discussed. We've heard friends joke about Domas for Zion Williamson. No, let's relax. But, barring some craziness, point being, I think Cam Johnson's the best guy that can get out there. I think he would help a lot. You'd get another wing. I think the combination of getting Cam Johnson and getting Devin Carter back in the near future would help a lot. Like we talked about, nobody to guard Paul George yesterday, Keon Ellis being your only answer. Both of those guys are other answers. Devin a little smaller, but like that 6'8" wingspan, I think helps a lot. Obviously, he's a very physical guy. He guarded up a lot throughout his time in college. He thinks he can guard 1 to 5. I don't think so. I think we hear a lot of people say they think they can guard 1 to 5, but I think 1 to 4 is not that crazy for Devin, to be honest, barring some, obviously, the ridiculous 4s and things. But you get both those guys. I think that helps with this team a lot. You get Cam Johnson, you get Devin Carter returning. 2, especially if we're talking unprotected firsts, Kevin Huerter, and I believe with the salary matching purposes, if you don't put Devin Carter in this deal, that you kind of do have to put something else. Maybe that could be Colby Jones as part of this conversation, as I kind of try to do this a little bit in the background. Or maybe it's Keon Ellis. I would rather give up, I've seen people debating it, I would rather give up Keon Ellis than Devin Carter for sure. If that's what it took. I'm not saying that I love Keon. I want Keon to be on this team.
We talked about it last night too. I mean, we talk about it a lot, I guess, last night. There's a lot happened right now. But we talked about last night for this very reason. Keon Ellis is on a very cheap, affordable contract, but he's not going to be a restricted free agent this upcoming or after next year, which means he's going to probably, if he continues to play at the level he's playing at, he's going to get more money than the Kings are probably going to want to give. If they by some chance do turn things around and give De'Aaron Fox a max or super max, if they want to add that contract into the fold, if they want to extend Keegan Murray, and you have Domantas Sabonis' $40+ million contract on the books, and assuming you have Cam Johnson's $20+ million on the books, it's just not possible to fork out another $8-9 million contract to Keon Ellis. The market is moving that way. Players are making, like we talked about, Ohtani money. So a role player like Keon Ellis in a couple of years now, he's not going to be making $2 million for a 3-and-D role player. He'll be making probably close to $10 million. That's just the way the NBA's evolved. Trey Lyles is making $8 million right now. So I think if it does take Keon Ellis, you keep your asset that's controllable in Devin Carter, who has definitely has a higher ceiling. And while that would sting, and I know the fan base loves Keon, you bring in a forward, a position of need, a guy who's shooting 43% from 3. He's a 90% free throw shooter, which is crazy. I'm looking at his game logs. The guy does not miss free throws. And the Kings have been a good free throw shooting team this year. But the point is, you add another guy to the floor with Malik Monk, who's been lights out for the most part. He's had his moments, but from the free throw line, he just emphasizes a lot of areas of need and helps. And the Kings have guards right now. They're good on the guards. I think that the market right now is kind of going to make it hurt a little bit more to get a player like Cam Johnson, like we talked about. Do I think it's great giving up 2 first-round picks or a pick swap in a first? No. I think that Cam Johnson is probably worth 1, but there's going to be other offers out there. And it's a question of how bad do the Kings want to improve? Because if they don't do it, we saw it with a couple of trades last year. We saw it in Dallas, who went out and got PJ Washington, who the Kings were tied to. Daniel Gafford, another player the Kings probably could have used last year. They parted with draft capital, less than first-round picks, mind you, or maybe there were a couple firsts involved. I can't really remember. But other teams will jump you and get these players that you're trying to get. And the Kings can't keep standing with their hands in their pockets and holding these assets, because what are you saving them for? Like, we've been wondering for a long time, what are you saving them for? They gave 1 pick swap up in the DeRozan deal, but we still haven't seen that deal where there's multiple firsts. This isn't quite Lauri Markkanen. This isn't quite, those other big names that we've seen the Kings tied to in the past, but I don't think it's a question. A player who has 2 more years after this year on his contract, who can shoot the 3 ball, he can rebound, he can defend at a high level. I feel like it's a no-brainer, but at the same time, maybe the offer, the Kings, maybe that deal, maybe it keeps getting inflated. Maybe they keep wanting for more and more and more. The teams offer more, and at some point you have to bow out. But if the offer is really down to 1 first and Devin, or 2 firsts, or a first and Keon, whatever, if you can avoid giving Devin up, I think I can kind of live with whatever else happens.
We've been going for a while, but I do also want to throw in to your Day'Ron Sharpe point, honestly, and would you guys feel better about throwing in Devin Carter if I think the strangest name in that ESPN article, Cam Thomas, is thrown in to the Cam Johnson conversation? Just for reference here, Ramona in the article, this summer Sacramento had checked in on Brandon Ingram, sources said. Also recently reported Kings circled the wagon on Zach LaVine, Kyle Kuzma, and Cam Thomas.
I'm not convinced that wasn't a typo.
She wrote Cam Johnson in the sentence beforehand. She said Sacramento has explored the trade market for potential upgrades, such as Brooklyn's Cam Johnson and previously Dorian Finney-Smith before he was traded. This summer, Sacramento had checked in XYZ.
Hoops Hype's Michael Scotto also put out that the Kings were tied to Cam Thomas. And we've also heard that the Kings have been tied to, it's out there too, I'm pretty sure, Anthony Simons, which is...
That was another very random
one. What are we doing?
Right? 2 high-scoring guards?
Like, what are we...
Right.
It doesn't make sense, man.
Any sense.
No. And like the Day'Ron Sharpe thing, sure, I feel better. I still don't feel good. Like I think Day'Ron Sharpe is somewhat interesting. He's what? I want to say 22, 24, somewhere in that range.
He's young.
Really, really good rebounder.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I don't really know what he does super well. And it may just be another situation where it's like, are we playing this guy? It's something that you try at the backup center. We'll see. But I don't know. I guess I feel better. I'm worried. I guess real quick to your point about Keon, Frank, I think that you were spot on with all that from the Kings perspective. But I also think that the contract situation that you laid out actually might make Keon less appealing to the Nets because they short-term are trying to lose games. And so unless they're just like flipping him, because I think he probably does have good value right now, maybe he's not the most appealing guy to Brooklyn's scenario specifically. But I'm getting worried that this is the Lauri Markkanen, the Pascal Siakam all over again. We've heard multiple instances throughout Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox's tenure in the front office with the Sacramento team where they've been like locked into one guy, right? It's the Pascal Siakam thing. Toronto came to town when all this is happening. And then while Pascal Siakam's warming up pregame and everybody, there was so much thought that like that trade could happen today, any minute.
Yes.
And we even see Masai Ujiri and Monty McNair having a conversation
on the court.
And 5 minutes after that, Shams tweets that the trade talks between those two teams have stalled out. And the Lauri Markkanen stuff, they were super on board with Lauri Markkanen this offseason. And to be fair, they weren't the only team. The Warriors were the other one that was really heavily linked. And then Lauri Markkanen ends up staying with the Utah Jazz, signing that extension. He can't be traded this deadline. It would have to be this next offseason. But both those instances, we didn't see a pivot. We didn't see a plan B get taken into action. And I'm just questioning if this doesn't work, what happens? Because something has to happen. And if Cam doesn't work out, if OKC decides they want this move, they can just override anything you're doing unless they decide, all right, Sacramento's being ridiculous. I'm not paying 2 unprotected first for Cam Johnson. And like Chris said, maybe Sacramento's in a desperate enough spot where they need to do that. They probably are, to be honest. And I'm horrified what that would mean for the future of this team. But they need to have a plan B. I'm very worried about how much they are locked in on Cam Johnson. And I feel like we've heard this story before and there wasn't a fallback after it didn't end up working out because they have to do something, and Cam makes a lot of sense, but you have to be able to pivot if this doesn't end up being the case. And I think that we're in a scenario and like a part of the timeline now where they will pivot because they have to, but is that a desperation? Holy crap, like what else is out there? What are we going to do? Not that they're not making phone calls. We've heard John Collins, Jonas Valanciunas, Jeremy Grant, but Kyle Kuzma's name being mentioned again, but it feels a little similar, no?
To me, the pivot, real quick, this is all I got to say. The pivot is, I would think, and I know Sam literally reported on it earlier today, but if you don't get, I think could be as simple as you don't get Cam Johnson, De'Aaron Fox is available for trade. And I know, again, Sam said earlier today that he's more likely to be traded this offseason than at the deadline. But if you're not improving this team this season with a guy like Cam Johnson, then the only other guys that are at that caliber that are even close to being available are guys like Jimmy Butler, and that just doesn't make any sense. That's complete desperation. And at that point, I do think you should probably just trade Miami De'Aaron Fox instead of trading Jimmy Butler to Sacramento for something like that. So that I feel like that to me would be where, if I were in charge and I were in this situation, that's where I would pivot. But I'm curious to see if that's what they do.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I don't think the Kings would do that, but I agree with that thought process because if you don't get Cam Johnson, trading for Kyle Kuzma, I just don't think it really does much. It just kind of is, I don't know, it's just a wash. Trading for John Collins, I'm more intrigued about that one if they decided to kind of go down that avenue because he fits a position of need. But I just feel like Cam Johnson is that's the guy, and we'll see. There might be a deal that comes to fruition that we didn't hear about, and that works out, and we're okay, well, I guess we were wrong. But I agree. I think that if it's not Cam Johnson, what do you do that really can make you become, lift you into a different tier in the West? But it's intriguing stuff, man. I mean, literally day by day here, we're just getting hit with some new information, a new storyline, and being at the arena at this time of year is always a ride. So it should be pretty eventful going forward.
Absolutely. Well, we've been going for a sec. Appreciate you guys for this for sure. I guess maybe last thoughts, just how optimistic, pessimistic, skeptical, whatever you're feeling about this Doug Christie era in Sacramento so far. Very early into it. 3 games, 2-1.
Feeling good. I'm feeling not good, but I'm feeling like winning basketball games is a positive development. And if that continues, the Kings will continue to be, viewed in a positive light. They'll continue to view Doug in a positive light. If they hit another lengthy skid, I have no idea what else is going to happen at that point. I was wondering, part of me was, what if they would have lost the last 2 games? Would anything else would have happened? Would they have made a trade sooner? I think the answer to that is no. I mean, the front office really is just moving at a snail's pace, so I'm not sure how much that's going to change. But the team seems like they're responding to Doug. Doug seems like he's ready for this opportunity and the challenge. And, again, just really cool seeing that kind of content come out from the Kings last night, and that kind of, that kind of chemistry kind of continuing to build there after a really, really hard week. And, tomorrow is the 7-day mark of the firing of Mike Brown, and there's a chance it could be 3-1 since that happened. And, that's not really a knock against Mike. It's just kind of more credit to Doug and this roster kind of banding together and through the adversity and responding. So another shorthanded game tomorrow. No John Morant for Memphis, and we'll see if Keegan's good. The injury report will be out tonight, so make sure you're checking out Brenden, myself, and Chris on social media for any of that news. But onward and upward, I guess, guys. There's nothing else they can do. You just got to keep winning, and that's the only thing that's going to make things better right now. Winning basketball games is truly the only thing that's going to make things better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel decent about where they're at. I don't know. I mean, I've never been in this kind of situation before, but the feelings that I feel like are going on right now is if you break up with somebody, or maybe somebody cheated on somebody, and then you end up getting back together, and they end up getting married. I just don't see that story panning out often, and it just to me feels like we're in that in between spot where, okay, we broke up, but I think we are going to get back to it. Just feels awkward. There just feels like there's some tension there that isn't going to it just feels like this story isn't going to end with a happy marriage and living happily ever after, and oh yeah, wasn't that so weird when we broke up for that small period of time. To me, this very much feels like, I don't know, it just feels like an awkward in between figuring it out phase, and I don't know. Yeah, the phase as it's going right now doesn't make me feel like we're going to get back together. That's kind of how I feel.
I actually think that's a great metaphor, because the
That's
whole how you got her is how you lose her thing.
Wow, I've never heard that.
Wow.
Well, all right, maybe I'm a little.
That's
yeah.
deep. No,
Anyways,
hey,
I would like to hear an explanation.
Well, Mike Brown's perspective, we're going this relationship thing, right? Is, were you talking to her the whole time? Or were you talking to this guy the whole time? And then the second we break up, you go get with this guy? You were talking to this guy the whole time.
The whole time.
You know,
like
behind
maybe
my back.
even
You had this
before they
plan the
were
whole
together.
time.
Maybe before they were even together, they were talking.
Yeah, your guy best friend the whole time. Really?
Wait, you guys made out at a party in high school?
Yeah. What?
Wait, what?
And so now,
And then you
Doug
just
gets
dated
with her.
Alvin after?
yeah, now Doug gets with her.
And now Alvin's still hanging around too. Like, what's that about?
Yeah.
Am I supposed to feel secure about that?
What is he still doing? What is he still doing here?
Yeah. Who else are you talking to?
Yeah, right.
You know?
Right.
Who else
Are you talking to Luke? I bet you're talking to Luke still too, aren't you? You're talking to Luke.
He was
Walton,
here
aren't
the other
you?
day.
No, you're,
He was here the
definitely
other
not
day.
talking.
What was he doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's fully out of here.
Yeah. You went to church on Sunday. Was Mark Jackson there?
Oh, okay.
You know? Who knows? Who knows? But I think it's a funny metaphor that I think is funnily fitting, I guess.
My last thought is before we go is that I really need this Doug thing to work out so that the Mark Jackson thing does not become a conversation again. I don't care that other people we've talked to, so that's not going to happen. I don't care. I still don't want to. I can't count it out. I refuse. It's not. It's still a possibility. I don't care what anyone says. So
That's the worst timeline. That's the worst timeline.
It's on you, Doug.
I agree. But, you know, interesting things going on with the Kings. I think they're at a very light part of the schedule. I think that they would have won these games with Mike Brown, to be honest. Now, maybe Mike Brown would have accidentally said, hey, let's only play defense for 2 possessions. And maybe things would have been different. Actually, I guess I will say on that topic, the only other aspect I've thought of is that Doug Christie saying, hey, let's do it 3 possessions. Mike Brown is saying, we need to do this every damn possession all game long, 26 times over. And that is a little bit different messaging in how that is portrayed, for what it's worth, to give Doug his credit. So 2-1 since the Doug Christie era has started in Sacramento. That's 2 straight wins against some injury-riddled teams, but still a lighter part of the schedule coming up here with Memphis game, 2 games against Golden State, 1 on the road. I want to say it's Sunday, and then they come back and play in Golden One Center on Monday. We'll see how it goes. So should be interesting, but we will keep covering it, obviously, here on the Return of the Roar podcast. Appreciate everybody that's listening on the YouTube side. Comments are always appreciated. Thumbs up help. Subscriptions for sure. We got a lot of great content going on. The Sam Ament clip that we played during this, you can hear the full interview from this morning on Sactown Sports YouTube and a bunch of other great content. We all write on SactownSports.com, doing some written content there as well. A lot of stuff on the social side as well, any sort of social platforms. So appreciate the consuming the content. There's a lot going on right now for sure, and a lot of different things. So be sure to stay tapped in, stay tuned in. Sactown Sports, also on our airwaves, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thanks to everybody for listening. You'll hear from us again in next handful of days here as we continue this Doug Christie era here with the Sacramento Kings. Thanks everybody listening. Peace.